The Great Awakening is officially here. You will know everything and hate it.
Bruh.
Hey guys, how's it going? And welcome back to another show. In today's show, we're out here on location as we're getting bombarded by, well, you can already guess who's bombarding us, right? Actually, pardon the noise today. Unfortunately, there's a lot of construction going on around me as the region I live in is getting ready and preparing for what's coming. Yeah, that's right. So, today, unfortunately, we're going to be doing our video under fire. I have no other choice but to, deal with the noise, just like we all have to deal with the noise today, in one shape, form, or another. There's a lot of craziness going on in the world, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. I was going to film indoors today, just like I did yesterday, but the noise is even louder, all right, indoors than it is out here. So that's why we're, going to be doing the show outside in my, makeshift bunker as we await the great religious war that we've apparently embarked on. So, guys, you guys already know at this point in where we are right now, I think most people these days are pretty awake. They pretty much know what's going on out there in the world. And most people are not happy with it. In fact, a lot of people, are almost in a sense of despair and wish they didn't know anything at all as to what is actually going on in the world these days. So, but unfortunately for them, well, you can't hide it anymore. Most people already know everything. Most people are already fully aware of what's going on. And, right now, that's the thing. People are just looking, not just for answers, but really looking for a solution for them and their family to be able to take on everything that's coming our way. The reality is that, again, we've talked about it, through the years here, but especially in the last several weeks, months, or what have you, that, everyone is waking up. Everyone is realizing that, what we've been told is not the truth. What we've been told this whole time about, what a reality is the complete opposite. And sure enough, as every day that we wake up, it's just getting more and more intense. Things are getting crazier and crazier out there. So, yesterday I decided to post a video talking about passport bros and all that, trying to be a little bit lighthearted, trying to get back onto that, just a more lighthearted, fun conversation. But it doesn't seem like, you guys are interested in that right now. You guys might not be interested in the topic, or you guys might be interested in knowing a little bit more about what's going on, or at least what my opinions are, or what my thoughts are on everything happening or going forward. And, the way I see it, just from a historical perspective, is simply put that, for the longest time, a lot of people have known or had the inclination that the American empire, the U.S. empire, was on its way out and it was going to get replaced by China. It's as simple as that. But as, the recent events have been kind of transpiring, a lot of us are pretty much realizing that, well, wait a minute. Are you sure we're going to get replaced by China? Is China really going to be the next empire? Or is it somebody else? And I think that's kind of like where a lot of people are at right now, that they're realizing that the other empire, the real next empire that might arise is not China. And it's definitely not the U.S. anymore, because obviously the U.S. is on its way out. So who else is really left out there? Israel. Yeah, that's right. I said it. It had to be said. But again, if you really just kind of look at everything, from the bird's eye view and kind of like see what's really going on, well, it starts to really make sense really quickly. That, again, we already know Israel has captured the U.S. government, the U.S. military, basically the whole country, right? So if that is actually the case, and we all pretty much, well know it by now, well, then aren't they the empire? Aren't they the ones in charge? Aren't they the ones that are now, again, trying to really, take over, the duties of the empire? Duty. I said duty. Anyways, no, but that's the truth. The reality is that That's basically, where everything's moving. And it seems that, what's going to eventually happen, because this is only getting out of hand. I mean, I know a lot of people think that this is going to be over in a few days or whatever, but it doesn't seem like that at all, going forward here. So if that were really the case, and China all of a sudden, feels like, hey, wait a minute, I thought we were supposed to be the next empire. I thought we were supposed to, be the ones that are going to be taking over and so on and so forth. Who the hell let these Jews in? Again, pardon my French today. I think at this point, we're all past, pleasantries, when it comes to talking about all this stuff. But yeah, better said, China's more like thinking, who let these Zionists in? Who let the Zionists in? Who? So basically, China's like, very anti-Zionist. They got their own situation over there. And, now it's, the way it's looking is that, China eventually will eventually have to get involved at some point, because at the end of the day, it's like, if they don't get involved, then we already know who the next empire is going to be, which is Israel. And so China, they want, at the very least, to get their crack at it, their shot at being the next person in power, the next empire in power. So I think eventually it's going to boil down to that. Another theory that I was thinking about, going forward, with all this, is that, again, I don't know how much or how deep you guys go down the rabbit hole. But again, the CIA, for example, the CIA is that, shadow government group, that basically controls a lot of what's going on in the USA. And you would assume that Israel has control over the CIA, right? But the reality is that again, if you go deep down the rabbit hole, you'll realize that the CIA and Israel, they hate each other. They really don't like each other. They have to deal with each other, but they really don't like each other. One hates one more than the other. I'll let you figure out who's the one that hates one more than the other, right? So, with that being said, what if like everything that's going on right now, all right, is a ploy to basically destroy Israel? What if, the U.S. government and the people in power, the people that are really, taking, the ones that are pulling the strings and stuff like that, what if they're working in conjunction with the CIA, maybe China, maybe others, in order to create this perfect atmosphere so everybody hates Israel, hates on, Israel, and basically allows the world to now dogpile on top of Israel, and for long story short, basically eliminate Israel. Because right now everyone's under the impression that we're gonna destroy and eliminate and basically level all of Iran and the Muslim world. I mean, that's the idea, right? That's the plan, supposedly. But what if secretly behind the scenes everyone's working against Israel? And this is why, you're seeing so much stuff online, talking about, everything from, what I've mentioned before in other videos here, as to, why is it that now all of a sudden we're going through this great awakening and everybody is literally finding out the truth, whether they want to or not. Whether it's the Epstein files or, people are, reading and translating the Talmud, or whatever it is, people are really starting to really figure it out. In fact, I saw a video this morning of some guy that was in Saudi Arabia, and he was just driving down some highway in Saudi Arabia, and he was basically saying that, he said in the video, even though the news is telling you that Iran is attacking us, he was basically showing in the video, he goes, Iran is over there, and everybody in Saudi Arabia has been seeing missiles coming from over there. And what is over there? Israel. So everyone in Saudi Arabia, just like most people and most of the Middle East that has been attacked by Iran, they're seeing the missiles coming from Israel. So again, most people, in that region are already fully aware that Israel is also attacking its friends, its neighbors, not just its enemies. And they're blaming it on Iran. And so, with everything going on, again, the U.S. using that shock and awe technique, which is, it was great during the Cold War. It was great during several engagements, when we were in different kinds of wars and we were engaging with, I don't know, other empires like Russia once upon a time. But we're living in a completely different world these days with completely different technology. And, you're seeing, like, for example, Iran, is able to, eliminate bases, eliminate desalination plants, water plants, eliminate, oil refineries with these little drones that cost around $35,000 to $50,000. And the U.S. is using $1 million missiles, multiple missiles, just to see if they can get one of those drones. And so, again, from a historian's perspective, from a war historian's perspective, this is not going to end well. This is not going to end well because the U.S. is fighting a completely different war than Iran is fighting. And Iran and its neighbors and its friends, they're gaining a lot of, how do I say this? What's the word I'm looking for? Sympathy. And everyone's hating and dogpiling on top of Israel and the USA. In fact, not so much the USA, because it's more like the world is already pretty much aware that the USA is just a lapdog of Israel. And so at this point, I think a lot of people are waking up to the fact or realizing that the U.S. is not the empire that we thought it was, not even anywhere remotely close to that. And that, the reality is that, right now it seems like, all the evidence proves or points to, Israel being the ones in power, being the ones in charge. Right? If I'm wrong, please let me know. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, maybe I'm misinformed or something, right? But that's the way it seems like. So imagine, what we think, imagine what other people around the world think that have been knowing this for a long time. There's a lot of, parts of the world that have already been very anti-Zionist, very anti-Israel, very anti, status quo, and so on and so forth. So now, as everything is being revealed, it seems that the only people that are left, to wake up are the American public and, other people in the West, in the first world. Because most people are pretty aware and pretty awake to everything that's going on and the reasons, for everything, happening. It's as simple as that. And so, the thing is that, I think that we're in a point in humanity, in human history. Again, this great awakening is nothing new. We've been through these great awakenings many times before. And, there's a lot of moving pieces here. There's a lot of things going on. Right now, behind the scenes, who's moving the money around? Who's funding this? Where is the money coming from? So, there's this lady out there named Catherine Austin Fitts or something like that. And, I've been following her for a long time, but very recently she was on the interview by the Tucker Carlson show or whatever, right? By Senor Tucker. And again, guys, Tucker's might be CIA. Don't get me started, okay? I'm not here, what. Anyways, the point is he interviewed her, right? And I've been listening to the interview, and I've been listening to her for a long time, and it's kind of crazy. Her basically, just reiterating things that she's been saying for years, and how everything is just coming into play, especially as it pertains to the digital money, the digital grid, the digital prison, the Great Reset. And this is why, these people in power are going after Iran, because Iran is one of those countries that is not fitting into this world control grid. And so that's why they're going after that. But that's the thing, though, Like, a lot of people are realizing, what's actually going on. And, right now, look, in all honesty, I know I was joking around with the noise, with all the, bombardments that I'm getting on my head or over here at the moment. But the reality is that nothing's going on out here in Mexico. I live in Mexico, and out here, ever since literally the bombs dropped, last Saturday over Iran, the construction has been picked up in this region like by tenfold. Because again, you guys know, have been following me long enough, that there's been a little construction going on here from time to time, my neighbors and stuff like that. But recently, it's been very difficult to even film videos, for crying out loud, just because of all the construction going on. Overnight, it seems like everyone is building. Everyone is in a mad rush, to build up this region of Mexico and other regions of Mexico. And why is that? Well, because again, if you follow history and your history books, the real history books, right? You know fully well that Mexico has always been a haven, all right, during times of major conflicts in the world, especially in the last 100 years or so, all right? And this is no different. There's out here in Mexico, there's again, most people might not know this unless you're out here, but there's a big, heavy influence of people from the Middle East, because as the U.S. and Israel have been destabilizing the region, for decades upon decades, a lot of these, immigrants that have had to leave their homes, wherever that was, a lot of them ended up coming out here to Mexico. And, there's a lot of cultural similarities between the countries and stuff like that. And a lot of it comes from, all the immigration that has come out here through the years. For example, in the U.S., as the years have gone on and we've had immigrants of all kinds, land in the USA, it has changed the culture. For example, pizza, we know pizza is as American as apple pie, but again, pizza comes from Italy. Hamburgers and hot dogs, again, can't get any more American than that. That's what we're going to have on the 4th of July, assuming we're still around. Well, that came from Germany and so on and so forth. So it's the same thing with a lot of things here in Mexico that people are not aware of. One of the most famous tacos out here is tacos al pastor, and basically it's just a Mexican shawarma. And like I said, I could go on and on. So, there's a lot of influence out here. Again, there's a lot of influence, within the Spanish Empire. There's a reason why I'm hairy and I look a little, moops, a little Moorish, because again, my family comes directly from Spain. And again, if you follow the history, well, you know why I look a little different than someone from, I don't know, Sweden or England. But I digress. The point is that right now, it seems like the world is about to embark on World War III. Again, we've already talked about this. I've mentioned to you before that, again, to me, the real beginning of World War III was, again, when Russia invaded Ukraine and COVID ended. That's when, World War III officially started. But, ever since last Saturday, that was the shot heard around the world that really got World War III started. And again, we're just in the beginning stages of it. We're only a few days in. And a lot of people think, oh, this is over. Oh, well, this is going to be over really quickly and yada, yada, yada. But they have no idea what we're about to embark on. They have no clue. I don't have any clue. Most people don't know. We're going to find out together. That's for sure. And please, by the way, let me interject here. If you are enjoying this kind of video and this kind of conversation or topic, let me know down below. All right. So that way I know that this is the things that you guys are more interested in, so I can continue talking about these things going forward. All right. But today we're just, talking about it topically in a sense, because, again, I want to measure the temperature out there with you guys, see where we're at, and see if this is the kind of stuff you guys want to talk about more and go really in depth in, because I'll be more than happy to. And but anyways, going back to what we were saying, what I was saying, what we were saying, me and my voices, right? What I was saying was simply put that, I don't think people are, have any clue of what we're about to embark on, because right now with everything going on in the Middle East, for example, they're basically putting the Middle East, that whole region, and places like Europe in a chokehold. No water, no electricity, no oil, no power, no food, and so on and so forth, and no money. And so it's going to force the hand of Europe to join the war. And so think about it. Now all of a sudden, Germany or Spain or Italy or whatever, it's a bunch of these countries, England, they start joining the U.S. coalition with Israel, to go after Iran. Well, don't you think that other countries might start getting involved? Again, I already gave you the scenario with China. Long story short, the way China's looking at this, they're pretty neutral, but, they're getting affected by it. Again, obviously, they rely on Iran for oil and resources and vice versa. But it's more than that, okay? It's the fact that it's right next door to China now. Now it's really, on its, really close to its doorstep. And like I was saying already, China, has their vision of being, the next empire or the next superpower. And, Israel is like, yeah, you know what? We're going to skip the line and we're going to put ourselves here. In fact, as I was saying earlier, I think Israel has a stronger case for being the next empire than China, because of they have successfully taken over the other empire. Again, the empire that's on its way out, like it or not, is the U.S. empire, the American empire, which again is run by other entities, and it's not the country that we grew up in, and there's a reason for that. Okay, and we know where the reason is. Okay, again, it's Israel, the lobbyists, AIPAC. I could go on and on, but again, that influence has already infiltrated so much and so strongly into our own government that we've already been captured. We've already known fully well that we've been captured. I mean, come on, even the ICE agents, the frozen water gang that's out there rounding people up in the streets of the USA, they are, they are trained by the IDF. So again, a lot of the, at this point, all this stuff is well known. And if you don't know any of the stuff that I'm telling you, you can very easily fact check it, or again, you can easily do your own research online, and you'll see how quickly all this pops up. So going back to my thesis here, or my idea as to what I really think is going on, is simply put, again, it could simply be that, again, this might be a giant ploy to destroy Israel, or what a lot of us are seeing with our own eyes. This is just a giant ploy to destroy the American empire so that Israel could take over and they can cement themselves as the next empire. Will that succeed? We don't know. Again, the way I see it, it might not succeed at all, because anytime that we've seen anything like this in history, it never goes as we think it does. One thing I like to remind people, again, this happens all the time. Happens all the time. But I'm going to give you the last example that really might cement this a little bit further with you guys. Okay, so the last major time that we saw something like this, where a smaller nation, a less powerful nation, basically destroyed an empire, was when the U.S., when we were still babies, okay, a little over 100 years ago, but it was when the U.S. destroyed the Spanish Armada, when we destroyed the Spanish Empire once and for all. And how did we do that? Well, it all started with Cuba. It all started with the Spanish-American War, all right? And again, I'm going to give you the cliff notes here, okay? Long story short, the Spanish, were like, well, wait a minute, we got the most powerful navy on earth, what I mean? Who the hell are these stupid Americans? We're going to kick their ass. They don't even have 3 ships. And of course, as soon as the Spanish said that, those are the famous last words. Because again, the U.S. had already developed this technology, this boat called the Ironclad. And it was a tiny little metal boat. It was the first metal boat with a steam engine in it. And it didn't even have any weapons or anything like that. But the one main difference between, the Ironclad and the Spanish Armada was that the Spanish Armada was still, a bunch of wooden ships. They were just these giant, wooden behemoths, okay, that were just circling the ocean. And, this Ironclad was just like a tiny little, metal rock, just kind of like floating about. And so obviously the Spanish were laughing at it. So, when the war started, they started to, bombard, this Ironclad, and they couldn't hit it. And then when they would hit it, it was like nothing, because it was just like a giant metal thing, just, in the ocean. And, the cannonballs and all that stuff were just bouncing off. And it got to the point where eventually this Ironclad got close enough to the ships. And again, think about it. You're a giant wooden ship, and all of a sudden you hit this rock. What's going to happen to the wooden ship? It's going to get a big hole, it's going to sink, and you're done. So what did the Ironclad do? Nothing. It just started playing bumper cars in the ocean, and before you knew it, the Spanish Armada was done, was defeated, all right, by this thing. So what, again, going forward to what's going on right now, again, back to what I was saying earlier about, again, Iran having drones, having certain technologies, they've been preparing for this war for decades upon decades. And the U.S. has not. The U.S. has been preparing for the Cold War. The U.S. has been preparing for shock and awe. The U.S. has been preparing for a completely different kind of war. Basically, we're going to intimidate you to death. We're going to have the biggest and most baddest military in the planet, and you guys are just going to be so scared that we're just going to win before we even show up. Kind of like how the Romans did. Kind of like how, many, militaries did throughout, history. But again, right now we're in that point in time where that military strategy does not work with the military strategy of its enemy. And its enemy is fully aware and fully prepared to deal with that, while the U.S. might not be fully ready or prepared to deal with what's going to happen now. Another thing too is that, as soon as, back in the day, if you were to just, just kill the leader, kill all the leaders, basically that's it. The country's in disarray, and that's it. You won. But that's not the case with, this situation now. Right now they sparked a religious war in a sense. By them killing the Ayatollah, by them killing all their leaders, by them killing, all the, all the wise men and all that stuff, all that has done is just basically, created this atmosphere as to where now everyone that basically consider themselves a Muslim. By the way, I'm not saying everyone, okay? But a good majority of the Muslim Islamic community out there, man, they're up in arms. You just, killed our religious leader, the person that God himself put here for us. And not just that, but then, all the destruction of all the other leaders and so on and so forth. So again, America thinks, the U.S. thinks, Israel thinks that that's great, that's perfect. Now they're all, spread around, all these little factions, and that's it. They don't have a leader, so we're good to go. But that's where, the U.S. is wrong and Israel is wrong, because their leader is a religious leader. It's a guy, it's a god, for crying out loud. And now, they've declared jihad. They've declared that basically now it's to the death. And, this is not going to end until they're all gone. And if, we're going to we're going to fucking sit here and pretend to think, pretend to even entertain the thought that all of a sudden now, the U.S. empire and Israel and all these factions are going to destroy Islam and the Muslims all around the world and create this hate towards them, it's not going to work. Because again, the whole world is already hating on Israel, hating on the Zionists, hating the U.S., hating the empire. So you're actually seeing a lot of sympathy, again, not just for the jihad and Islam and Muslims and Iran and so on and so forth, but you're seeing, again, a lot of people take arms for them and realizing really what's going on here. And this is, like, again, where China, Russia, and all these individuals will eventually, come in eventually, once this thing starts getting really hot and really crazy out there. Just how the U.S. Joined World War II late in the game, all right, and ended up being the top dog. Well, same thing. If all of a sudden everybody's killing each other out there, all these countries are out there, destroying each other, and then China just happens to come in with Russia later on. Yeah, so anyways, there's a lot of things going on right now. I mean, the last thing I'm going to say here is something that, I really did not want to talk about just yet, because I haven't really confirmed it per se. So, there's a lot of news out there, real news, made up news, fake news, all kinds of information out there. So it's hard to decipher everything right off the bat. But I mean, one of the first things I saw this morning when I woke up was the fact that a lot of U.S. soldiers are complaining and revolting over there because they have been told by their leaders, by their squad leaders, the lieutenants or whatever, that they're fighting a religious war. And the reason for the U.S. being out there doing what they're doing is to bring on the apocalypse. And a lot of soldiers out there hey, wait a minute, that's not what we signed up for. That's not what we were told we were here for, and so on and so forth. So, like I said, guys, we haven't seen anything yet. If you're only watching the mainstream media in your own country and you're not really paying attention to what's really going on around the world, and you're not really dialed in to the whole situation, man, are you going to be in for a lot of surprises coming forward. But again, the more informed you are, well, the less surprising any of this stuff is going to be. So again, what I just said, about, Trump saying, hey, there's a religious war or whatever. I'm not, confirming that. I'm not saying any of that. But when I heard that, it simply confirmed, at least for me, a lot of conspiracies or biases that I had towards a situation. It's like, hey, wait a minute. You know what I mean? I've been thinking for years, that everything going on is just a giant religious war that we're not being made aware of. And sure enough, as time goes on, all these individuals, whether it's Trump or Marco Rubio or whoever, Netanyahu, whatever, right? Netanyahu, doesn't matter who it is. Long story short, they're saying the quiet part out loud. They're letting us know exactly, what their thought process is, and they're not hiding it anymore. So again, and just to give you a perspective on the U.S. side of things, what they're planning on doing with, with Iran is to basically choke them out. Again, which is, cut off the head, which they have already done, and then have all the factions that would be normally supporting this jihad or whatever, have them fight against each other for resources, mainly water. Now, is that going to work? I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you guys been around religious extremists of any religion. That something like that is not necessarily going to deter them, okay, for fighting to the death for their God or their religion or whatever's coming. In fact, they're going to double down, triple down, quadruple down. So again, we're seeing the tactic of the U.S. against Iran is the same old tactic, the same old, military playbook that they've always used. And the military playbook that Iran is using and the people that support Iran are using is nothing that we've really seen before. And I think that the U.S. and the empire has bit off more than they could chew. Now, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, was it on purpose? Or was it, just basically, hubris, that led us here? We'll find out soon enough. Because again, this all might just be a giant ploy to eliminate and destroy Israel. Or it might just be a giant ploy to destroy the U.S. empire so that Israel can take over. Or, this could be a giant ploy for both Israel and the USA to get eliminated and China to rise up. We don't know. I mean, one thing that we do know is that the Rothschilds, the bankers, they're supporting every single side of this conflict. All sides of the conflict. Every conflict. Same as it ever was. So we'll see. Again, that's why I was bringing up the whole thing with Catherine Austin Fitts and talking about money and things like that, which we will be talking about in future episodes, okay? Because I feel like at this point it's time to start talking about these things again. Bitcoin, gold, silver, paper money, the financial system, and so on and so forth. Because that's the thing. That's really what's the underlying thing that's propping this whole thing up. And if all of a sudden Iran, starts gaining ground with their military tactics, because their military tactics are basically to starve the world, to close off that region, okay? And to starve the whole region, okay? And eventually it's going to, hit other parts of the world. Again, I feel lucky being out here in Mexico because we survived COVID very easily because, well, Mexico produces the majority of the things it consumes. Now, obviously, just like every other country, we import, export, whatever. But Mexico's in a really good spot in that sense. All right. And I feel like it's only going to get in a better spot as things get crazier out there. But again, I would not be feeling safe right now if I was in the U.S. I would not feel safe, thinking or knowing of what's to come or what could come. Imagine all the sleeper cells that are in the U.S. right now. Islamists, Muslim. We already know how the U.S. does false flags against itself. 9/11, for example, was the last major event. Don't be surprised if something like that were to happen. Whether we do it to ourselves or not. So, like I said, guys, I feel like right now, it's just the beginning. We're just at the very, very beginning. We ain't seen jack shit yet. I mean, again, this morning, besides reading what I just told you about what Trump said, religious war, whatever, the other thing was the fact that, we basically, how do I say this? I'm sorry, because I'm thinking in Spanish. But we had another attack against a Latin American country. So, the U.S. and Ecuador, they have been seeing eye to eye for a while. And as you guys already know, the U.S. has been, spreading its influence out here in Latin America. They just did an operation in Venezuela. They did another operation in Mexico. And apparently, as of today, they had another operation in Ecuador. So again, look how thin, we're being spread all around the world. Look at everything that's going on right now in the Middle East and beyond. And yet the U.S. is like, all right, we're going to go after Ecuador now, too, as well. So, guys, like I said, we're only getting started. We haven't even hit we haven't even struck the tip of the iceberg yet. So, anyways, guys, I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed today's conversation. I really, really hope you guys made it all the way to the end of the video. If you did, let me know what your thoughts are down below. Let me know what you think. Let me know if what I was saying made sense or if it didn't make sense. All right? Again, let's start the conversation. Let's continue the conversation. Because like I said, I got a feeling that we're going to be talking about this or talking about, all these world events on a regular basis out here because things are only just, going from bad to worse. There's a lot of people out there that think, how much worse can it be? Or how much worse can it get? Man, you have no idea. You have no idea. So, again, only time will tell. We will definitely see it all together. The revolution will be televised. In fact, the revolution is on YouTube and it's on the internet. All right? So, again, the revolution will definitely be televised. All right? So, all right, guys, I really, really hope you guys enjoyed today's conversation. I know it was a long one. I know we had a lot to talk about, but I figured, hey, I have a lot of things to say. I had a lot of things in my head, and I had, I wanted to share with you guys, and we did it. Even though we were under fire this whole episode, hopefully you guys were able to hear me and understand everything I was saying, and hopefully, again, we can continue this conversation later in another video. So, all right, guys, with all that being said, I really hope you guys enjoyed hanging out with me today. I know I did, and we survived another day. We survived another video, and you already know the deal, guys. If you want to see more videos like this, you want to see more content like this, check out the rest of the videos on my channel. Check out the channel. Please like, please subscribe. Please check out my other channels. And again, you already know the deal, guys. I love you guys. I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye, guys.